Hello everyone, and welcome back to my podcast series, Compounded Interest, where I sit down and chat with founders, investors, and business leaders making an impact in this world. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I've made a lot of videos focused on helping students break into their dream roles in finance. Well, my guest on the podcast today is on a similar mission. Mike Lukasevicz is an entrepreneur who has already founded 3 businesses. He currently operates HirePrep and Axia Growth, where he is revolutionizing both finance recruitment and business development. HirePrep is transforming how candidates prepare for finance careers through its comprehensive ecosystem, featuring AI-powered interview preparation, mentorship programs, and career coaching, alongside 2 media platforms with thousands of subscribers, The Daily Technical and The Deal Talk. Through Axia Growth, Mike is modernizing deal sourcing and lead generation for financial professionals and businesses, leveraging AI and automation to connect financial advisors and private equity firms with qualified opportunities. There is no doubt about it that Mike is a builder. From working for free as an intern at a venture-backed startup to generating 5 figures of monthly revenue as a solopreneur, Mike has quite the story to tell, and I am excited to share it with you. I recommend getting your notebooks out because this episode is jam-packed with actionable advice for how to go from 0 to 1 on your startup idea with the help of AI and automation. But before getting into the conversation, if this is your first time on my channel, then hi, my name is Cameron Galbraith and I'm a finance professional based here in New York City. I make videos every week aimed at helping you level up in your career, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an upload. And with that said, here is my conversation with Mike Lukasevicz. All right, Mike, thank you so much for joining us here today. Why don't you start off by giving us a quick intro onto who you are and also what you've been working on?
Of course, yeah. First off, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Nice to be in the city recording this in person.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm the founder of HirePrep and Axia Growth. So Axia Growth is lead generation and deal sourcing business. Lead generation largely for financial advisors, and then conduct deal sourcing. We're working with buy-side firms right now. So we're working on kind of like getting up our first clients right now. I've been really working on refining the systems and figuring out the tech stack that we're going to use, and then go and refine that offer. Yeah. And then also with HirePrep, we're building an AI-powered interview prep tool. And this ended up turning out into more of like a holding company with recruiting prep resources. Yeah. So under the HirePrep umbrella, we have the platform, which is launching in February 17th, actually. So about a month. And then we have a coaching service that we're offering. So like more of like a premium high-ticket coaching service for students going and recruiting for finance. We have a couple media brands we're building out. So we have the Daily Technical newsletter, which just hit 16,000 subscribers today. So with the Daily Technical, every day you get an overview of how to answer the previous day's question, and then the question of the day. Students and subscribers can go and submit their answer via a form in the email, and then get AI-generated feedback in their inbox within 60 seconds, completely for free. So we've seen some really explosive growth there. Then we're building up a newsletter right now called the Deal Talk. So if you've ever been asked, walk me through a deal you've been following in an interview, this newsletter every week is going to go and give you a rundown of a recent deal that happened and hit on all the key points that you would need to touch on in an interview to go and walk through it. So those are the 2 big things I'm working on right now, and always just working on like little other side projects, playing around with AI, automation.
Well, I was going to say, 2 small things that you're working on. Those are you're working on a million things. Share a little bit more about your background. Kind of tell me how you got into entrepreneurship. Your student life, all of that. I understand, you're still a student, so you manage all of this. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll hit on the first part about how I got into entrepreneurship. I think I was always kind of an entrepreneur. Like I started when I was younger. I really wanted to get an iPad one summer when I was younger. What 13-year-old kid doesn't want a brand new iPad? And my parents were like, all right, you need to find a way to pay for this because we're not going to go and spend $1,000 on an iPad for you. Yeah. So I just started mowing lawns in my neighborhood, going and knocking doors, getting a couple clients. I ended up saving up and getting an iPad by the end of the summer. So that was really my first entrepreneurial experience, and like when I noticed that if I work hard and apply myself, that I could see some rewards from that. Yeah. And then fast forward to when I got to Williams College, I enrolled there as a student athlete. So I was on the football and track and field team. And I had a back injury in the spring of my freshman year, so I had to step away from both sports. That was like 40 hours a week that I now had free. Yeah. So this is when I worked on my first startup experience called Token Tags. We were building an analytics tool for NFT communities. And that was kind of like my first introduction to the startup world. And then as for managing it all with school, a lot of time blocking and leveraging a lot of AI, a lot of automation. And just, I think, having like a really simple but efficient task management system. I've tried so many different tools out there, and they all just tend to overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
What I use right now is I just have a table on Notion, and I just have tasks, estimated time duration. So like less than 15 minutes, less than 30 minutes, less than an hour.
Yeah.
And then just status, pending, processing, done.
Okay.
And that's it. Just keeping it
I
really
like that.
simple.
Yeah, because everyone on watching, I'm the old-fashioned to-do list, and yeah, I've tried a million different things myself. And
yeah, I started with the to-do list.
The to-do list, like nothing really for me beats it, and it's like the simplicity. But what you were saying about the time duration, I think is interesting, because like that's the issue for me. It's like, all right, if I can either do this one small email project or go to the gym, they're not really the same time. So I like that approach.
And big believer in Parkinson's law that work will expand to the time that you give it. And if I set an estimated time duration for a task, I have a little kitchen timer on my desk. So I'll go and set that for like a task that should take less than 30 minutes. I give myself 30 minutes to go and get it done.
Okay.
And if it's not done in 30 minutes, then the task goes to the next day and I'm on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So I just try to be really efficient with my time and like really cutthroat with tasks. And I generally don't have to push tasks on to the next day. They end up taking a lot less than I estimate.
Yeah.
But just having the timer in front of me really helps, because I don't go and like check my phone or go check my email in the middle of it. I'm just like tunnel vision in getting that task done. And I also force quit all applications before I start a task, and then only open up what I need to get that done.
Okay. I love that. I'm learning a lot in this, because it's like I'm going to try that tomorrow actually, because I'm going to have a million things just related to the podcast to do. But yeah, so you said you really wanted to save up for an iPad. Ben, if you're watching this, this was, I guess, if I'm a few years older than you, and this will date me. But it was the iTouch is what he really wanted. And so like for us as a kid, it's like whatever amount of money, like that seemed insurmountable. It's like, oh, how am I going to save up for that? But my brother did that, and he's an entrepreneur now himself, which is a nice natural transition, because you're talking about kind of mowing lawns, you're out and about, you're hustling, making the money. You go to school, and then you still start the token project. But then you decide you kind of want to go down the investment banking route, which is inherently not a super entrepreneurial approach. You're a small fish in a very big pond. You, as an analyst, you don't have much ownership over anything. Why did you decide to go down that route initially?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go into the first startup experience that I had a little bit. So with Token Tag, this was my freshman year. I ended up working my way to co-founder, but I started off working with the company as kind of just like an unpaid intern, going and helping out with things. But I ended up really enjoying it, getting really invested into it. I actually took time off of school once I got promoted to that co-founder role from the effort that I was putting in as an intern. And with that company, we ended up raising a little over $400K to go and bring the product to market. And if you know anything about NFTs, you know that the NFT market absolutely crashed in about early 2022. Yeah. So at that point, we had launched. We had brought 20,000 users onto the platform in our first month. But kind of like the way that we were building was, we were going for growth and user acquisition over generating revenue, and we figured grow now and generate revenue later. Yeah. Which, as of now, I think I would probably approach it a different way. Sure. So once the market crashed, we weren't generating revenue. We ran out of runway, and we had some internal disputes with the team. So I ended up stepping away. And at this point, I was super risk averse. I didn't want to do anything entrepreneurial and risky, because I was just thinking forward, like, what if this happened when I was like 29, 30 years old? Like, I have a wife, a house, kids, and now no income. So that definitely scared me. So that's what kind of led me to go down the path of investment banking. And I think everything happens for a reason, and going through the recruiting process is what opened my eyes up to the gap between the resources that were available to go and prepare for technical interviews versus what technology could enable. Yeah. You go through the process, you see the weaknesses kind of in the space with respect to how people are studying for it. I myself know the amount of hours I spent just looking through kind of the classic 40 questions that you need to know for an investment banking interview, and kind of just not having the best way to test it. So you went through that process, you were successful in the process, but in the end, you ultimately decided not to accept the offer. Is that right? Correct. Yeah. So I ended up receiving an offer to a middle market firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was like a TMT group, so I was really interested in the tech side of things. Yeah. But I ended up declining it because I started playing around with the initial idea for HirePrep while I was recruiting. So I drafted a really long ChatGPT prompt. So I had this prompt in ChatGPT on one screen, and then on another screen, I would have a Google Sheet that would have a database that would have question, sample answer, my answer, and then AI feedback. So I would go and copy and paste all of those inputs into the long prompt I had to go and get feedback. And I ended up dialing it in and getting really good feedback on my answers. And I shared this system with a couple friends. They enjoyed it, but it was just too manual for anyone to really do, except for me, because the system just works with the way that I think. So it ended up working for me because I attribute that to a lot of the interview success I had. I think that being able to learn through actually answering a question instead of just going through and reading a study guide. I mean, it's night and day with the effects. I mean, there's a study, I forgot who it was by, but it's almost a 2x difference when you're studying by actually answering the question aside from just going and pure memorization.
I would think the knowledge would be even more than 2 times. I mean, honestly, because it's studying for the GMAT recently is my most recent experience with it, but it's like, when you read through something in your study and you're like, oh, I would get that right on the exam. It's always easier to say that as opposed to actually just applying yourself and trying to do it. So I think, especially for those questions, there's no better way to do it than kind of testing yourself and really trial and error. So
100%.
So you go through that process, you realize, okay, I just built this out, but this is way too tailored for my own learning skills. Some of your friends enjoyed it, but still it was a little bit too manual. At what point from there did you say, okay, I can take this from a tool that I made, one afternoon playing around with to something I can actually scale and grow and help others with?
So I actually realized this before I secured my offer. I was playing around with wireframes on Figma for the HirePrep platform V1, which looks nothing what the platform is right now. But I was going through, I made like a clickable prototype on Figma, and I showed it around. People loved it. They thought it was really cool. So I knew that there was something to the idea, and it was really just a matter of me realizing deep down that I truly wanted to be an entrepreneur and that the best time to take the risk is now instead of like 5-10 years down the road, which is, I feel like, what a lot of people tell themselves. Like, all right, I'm going to go and work for 5 years, then I'm going to start my own company. And I feel like a lot of the time that never happens, unfortunately, for a lot of people. So what it really took for me was going and traveling. So I went to Amsterdam in March of that year. And I went to the Van Gogh Museum and just walking around and seeing how someone could dedicate their life to making art and just creative expression just like really inspired me. Granted, like Van Gogh and me building HirePrep are 2 very different things, but I just found it very inspiring. And that night I was like, okay, I'm not going into investment banking right now. I could always go and join the industry later on. Like it's not impossible to do, but I don't think I could go and start a company later on. I'd rather take on the learning debt right now and go and learn how to run a company, how to hire people, how to run payroll, all these things, these unsexy things that most people don't think about with entrepreneurship. Like even just getting an EIN number and opening a bank account and starting an LLC. So I just got the ball rolling with doing that. But I needed capital to start this business off. And coming off my last startup experience, I had gone in debt with credit cards. I didn't have any savings left. So I had nothing in terms of capital to start this business up. So that was the hardest part of the decision, I think, was finding a way to make it possible. So I kind of like went back to the drawing board, and I realized that this wasn't a venture fundable business. Like it's not $1 billion idea. It would be really hard to pitch it as that. And on the other side, I didn't want to go and take on angel investments or raise from friends and family. That's just, I feel like, puts you in a very awkward position if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and your grandma's like, hey, how's that startup going? And I go, wait, I actually lost it all. So I started a service-based business called Axia Growth. So that's what I've since pivoted into lead generation and deal sourcing. I started that off as growth marketing for fintech companies. Because that's where a lot of my experience in my first startup came from, was on like the growth marketing side. So I just started sending a bunch of LinkedIn direct messages out and saying, hey, here's my experience, here's what I can help you do. Would love to talk about like any potential ways we can work together. So I ended up just doing that to scale it up to 5 figures a month. And once we kind of hit that number that I was looking for to go and build HirePrep, I started toggling down our client load, kept a few clients just to keep the lights on, pay my bills. But at that point, it was kind of like all guns blazing ahead. And this was about August of this year that I started toggling that down and going full-time into building HirePrep.
Fantastic. Yeah, so you touched on just everything that goes into entrepreneurship more so than just picking out the logo. And I think that's what a lot of people don't think about when they probably go into it. But for you, in addition to kind of just having that experience working at that startup, you mentioned initially you were unpaid. You were doing that just to get experience. Do you suggest for other students who really want to kind of get their foot in the door and get that experience, but maybe don't have the credibility or kind of the background to really demand a salary, regardless of how small it would be, to kind of volunteer themselves initially? And then I guess another question related to that is, once you've done that, you show your value. How do you then kind of transition that into, hey, maybe I should get paid. Maybe I should be a co-founder for this, because you clearly were able to navigate that relatively successfully.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I would definitely recommend going and working unpaid. I think if you're interested in an industry or interested in a company, the best way to get your foot in the door is to go and offer to do work for free.
Yeah.
And it's an even better value proposition if you can send an email or message and say, hey, I already know how to do X, Y, and Z. You don't have to train me. I just want to get involved and do some work for free.
Yeah.
I would completely recommend doing that to anybody. And if someone reached out to me and said, hey, I'd like to come and help you out of HirePrep and I'll create all of your short form videos for free, I would jump at that right away. That hasn't happened because that's very rare.
If you're watching
if anyone's watching and can generate short form videos and has some finance knowledge, send me a DM. But yeah, so first off, I would definitely recommend doing that. I think that is a huge value add to any company and a great experience to anybody. And if you're a student, like at the end of the day, like you'd be making like maybe $15, $20 an hour doing anything in that capacity at a startup. And I think that the learning experience is worth much more than the hourly rate at that point. And like, I mean, take it from me, like I'm a first gen college student. I'm on pretty much full financial aid. So like it wasn't really easy for me to go and swing working for free, but it was definitely worth it just in the experiences and then even in the connections that you make. People really respect that if you can go and work for free. And then as for the second piece of how to kind of like level up from starting off as an intern, I think that's difficult and very situationally dependent. So in my situation, we had a current co-founder when I joined who wasn't pulling their weight, and I was just frankly putting out way more than they were. I was more dedicated to the business. I was willing to take time off of school when they were still interested in going and continuing with their degree. So it was really just the level of dedication, the level of output that made it kind of like a no-brainer for that to happen. So I mean, I think it's really just putting yourself in a position where there's really no other option than to kind of put you into that role. And even as a co-founder, I mean, we were paying ourselves like $400 a week. So it wasn't like I was getting a big payday, but I did have some potential upside.
I mean, to go from 0 to 400 though, you know, that's an infinite percentage increase. So there you go. But no, I think that's super interesting. Something that I always recommend to people too. Of course, it's a little bit challenging in certain financial industries and spaces just due to compliance and all of that. But my first internship that wasn't working for my dad technically was at a local hedge fund in Naples, which sounds really crazy, but similar to you, I kind of was just, I really was eager to learn and contribute. And so it was the summer of COVID, so 2020, so there really wasn't that much going on, so I had some time. And I just reached out to all the investment firms I could find in Naples, and I said, look, this is me, like, you know, I only have 2 years of finance under my belt at the University of Florida, and really was just able to connect with people, but said, like, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to learn, to contribute, to research whatever you need. And so in the end, I was able to find an internship, and, you know, I think I wouldn't be here today if the portfolio manager didn't take a chance on me, but also, you know, having the confidence to cold email somebody, I think is so important in this day and age.
100%. So. People who send cold emails like that are very rare at the same time. I mean, and
a cold email that actually connects you with somebody, because I get a lot of messages on LinkedIn and emails where it's very clear that they just copy and pasted it. And especially for me, like, I'm a very online person. It's pretty easy to find something like a tidbit to show that you actually like looked me up. So I think that just goes a long way too, because now so many people are doing just the blanket copy and paste, but there's just a ton of opportunity if you can actually show that a little bit of a personal touch goes a long way.
100%. And like what I've noticed too, especially with getting more involved with HirePrep and kind of like helping people go through the networking process, is it's really all in the subject line, because you need to get someone to open up your email. So like what I've noticed is mentioning some sort of connection that you have with them. So like if you're going and looking to get an internship somewhere and you're reaching out to someone who was either played the same sport as you, for example. So I was a football player and I was reaching out to someone who's at, say, Goldman Sachs in New York City. They were on the football team. At maybe a different school, I would just say football player interested in XYZ group at Goldman Sachs. And that will improve your response rate quite a bit.
100%. Even if someone has never heard of my YouTube channel, but they throw in the fellow Gator, I always open that. And I actually just did that to somebody like last week. It was something that I saw that they were on the board of, I won't say it, but a huge financial company, and they went to UF. And I was like, oh, like, you don't see that every day. So I pulled that card on LinkedIn, and I was like, oh, fellow Gator reaching out for finance connection. So yeah, cool how that all works out. And yeah, so obviously that was instrumental for you, but you had already had some exposure to kind of the Web3, the tokenization space, all of that. Like, where did you get exposed to that? How did you start learning about that? I mean, now, of course, it's a little bit more mainstream, but a few years ago, it was a bit more niche. So just curious kind of how that came about.
Yeah, so I mean, my freshman year of college, I started trading NFTs. I lost a lot of money. I didn't do very well, a relative amount of money at that time.
Yeah.
So I didn't do very well trading NFTs, but there was a lot to learn just in how the blockchain works overall. Like, the blockchain is a lot more than Bitcoin and Ethereum. So kind of like I built on that experience a lot with my first startup at Token Tag, because we were like really deep into the industry with like blockchain analytics.
Yeah.
I'd say that it was kind of like a social play. So we were connecting Discord, Twitter, and the blockchain together and creating one unified user identity, so that people who lead these NFT communities can better engage and reward their community members for their overall engagement instead of just engagement on one channel.
Yeah.
So I was able to learn a little bit through there, but that was still kind of like siloed into the NFT space, which has kind of died off right now. I hear things about it every now and then, but I think that all of the like attention and like what's like sexy in crypto right now is meme coins, which is also another great way to lose money. So I don't know if I'd recommend it unless you have insider information. But as for like tokenization, that came from just reaching out to fintech companies, and I knew I wanted to do something that was kind of adjacent to Web3 and decentralized finance, because I find that very interesting, and I think that that's the way things are going, just with a lot of the efficiency that the blockchain unlocks. So tokenization was very appealing to me. So I was just looking for a company that was really pioneering the tokenization space, and that's when I came across Centrifuge. So I reached out to their CMO on LinkedIn and just sent, like, I remember I was driving to dinner with my girlfriend and her family, sitting in the backseat of her car, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to send out some LinkedIn messages. I have 30 minutes in the car. So I sent her a message, and she replied. I went through a brief little interview process and ended up coming on board to the team, and that was a great experience. Getting to really dive in, because so they're basically bringing private credit onto the blockchain. So just very interesting applications. Private credit isn't quite ready to go into the blockchain yet, but since they're building such a comprehensive platform, it's really easy for them to bring like treasuries onto the blockchain, which have kind of been what have been really popular with like BlackRock's BUIDL fund, and then some of the other assets that are coming on chain. So that's kind of where I got involved in the tokenization side of things, and that's kind of like that was the last experience I had directly working with tokenization. Right now, I am a token holder of Centrifuge, and I'm pretty active in the DAO. But other than that, that's the extent of my involvement right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's super cool. It's something I'm still trying to learn more about. But I see connections there between, it's decentralized finance. It's different than kind of the traditional space. There's a similar approach to how you've taken on in recruiting for finance, recruiting for investment banking. It's like there are other ways to go about things, and so just a random connection there that you're open to seeing a different way that something can be solved. And I think that's kind of the whole point about tokenization, about blockchain is, just because we've done something a certain way historically doesn't mean it is the best way. And I think that's what HirePrep is doing a lot of too.
100%.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit more so just to the venture side of things. So I know when you were at your startup, you had raised capital. Maybe it wasn't the right time. You learned from that experience. You and 99% of founders who do the same thing. So that's not a super unique experience. But now you mentioned taking a slightly different approach with HirePrep. You've realized maybe that's not all businesses need to be venture backed, and definitely not all businesses should be. So just curious, kind of a little bit more understanding of how you kind of came to that realization, and also, have you ever had hesitancies of like, it'd be really nice to raise a little bit, but you've stayed true?
Yeah, so I think my realization there was that if you don't have $1 billion idea, don't bother trying to raise money for it.
Yeah.
There are other raise traditional venture funding. There are ways that you can go and take out a loan or raise debt or friends and family, angel investors. I think those are all great ways to source capital if you need to for a business.
Yeah.
But the traditional venture model, I think, should be limited to ideas that really have the potential to go and be $1 billion company. Because if they're not, then you're basically lying when you're pitching investors if you don't really believe that the company can be that big. And you're also just kind of wasting your own time with the venture money, because if you're a founder and you really want to get something out of the business and you're taking on a bunch of venture capital, your stake is going to end up being pretty small by the end of the day. So you want to build a really big company if you want to get rewarded for that. But as for how my perspective changed with it, with HirePrep, I initially just outlined the budget of everything that we were going to need to go and build the product. And to this point, it's been relatively accurate. I kind of underestimated a few things on the product development side. I didn't think that it was going to be as time intensive as it was, but I've also added a bunch of features since I initially started thinking through the platform.
Yeah.
But just going through that initial budget, I realized that this isn't something I need to raise money for. And I also wanted to retain complete ownership of the business, because the way that I see HirePrep, I see it going two ways. I see it going one way of just being a great cash flowing business that I run for the next 10 years. And then the other way that I see it growing is we really go and crush it in the finance industry, and we can go and explore going and getting acquired, or going and like rolling up a bunch of other finance prep companies. And that would be a point that we could go and raise capital to go and build more of a conglomerate in the finance prep space. But as for right now, there's really no need to raise money. I mean, the startup costs are relatively low. And I think when you're going and building a business without having raised money, when you're spending your own money, you're a lot more careful with how you're spending it. And you can be very resourceful. Like I've been able to, all our marketing spend is minimal. Most of HirePrep's budget goes directly to product development. And I mean, that just comes from basically putting in sweat equity. So I've just been going and writing a ton of content, going and reaching out. We built a pretty intricate LinkedIn outreach system where we had 5 people that were in an automated system, sending out LinkedIn messages every day, managing their inbox. And that's how we got our first 1,000 people on our wait list when we launched our beta. But it definitely teaches you to be scrappy. And I think that whether or not HirePrep works out, the lessons I've learned from having to build a company on a tight budget, I think those are worth more than anything.
And I think down the road, if you ever were to raise capital, I think the VCs would be very happy to hear that mindset. And yeah, just on a related note too, it made me think, what did it make me think? Just of the aspect of, if it's not going to be $1 billion business, if it's not $1 billion idea, it's not worth your time. And I think for a lot of VCs, they probably wouldn't have invested in it, because hopefully if they don't think it could be $1 billion business, they're not going to invest. Just the nature, like the power law, they expect 95% of their investments to go to zero. And so they're really reliant on the other 5. And so if that's one of the 5, then it still, gets to $10 million in valuation. That's probably not the best for them. So really just helpful that you had that experience, and also just the exposure you've had already at such an early stage. I mean, talking to you, I feel you've lived many more years than I'm sure your birthday would insinuate. So kudos to you for that.
Appreciate that. Yeah. And then on the venture side thing, I actually had an interesting conversation when I was coming up with the idea for HirePrep and kind of outlining the business. I reached out to an alum from my college who runs a venture capital firm.
Great.
I'll keep the firm name out of this, but it's a pretty large firm based out of New York. And I ran him through the idea, and he's like, "Oh, that sounds like a cool little project, but none of us would be interested in it." And I was kind of already thinking that way. I was looking more for just advice on starting a business, not so much on hey, give me money for this. But that really affirmed the light bulb that was going off in my head, and I was like, all right, I do not need to raise money for this.
Well, I think just with Twitter and everything these days, people love the idea of being a founder, of raising capital. So they can post that LinkedIn post about, so we just raised a pre-seed, whatever. But the businesses, the lifestyle businesses as they're called, which, take it for what it's worth. But I think there's a lot of value in that. I mean, that's how I've run my YouTube channel. And of course, it's at a much smaller scale than all of this. But, if I were having to report to some shareholders every month, it'd be a totally different way of doing it. And then also you can do it at your own pace. And, 100%. That still might be 100 miles per hour, but that's good. That means you don't have to wait for the next fundraising round to invest in the new feature. You don't need to wait to hire somebody. And so I think it's just a much more sustainable way. But then also when you have the energy, it just allows you to, you're really the only limit there.
Exactly. And it's great not having to report to anyone on growth, because we had to push our launch back by about a month and a half with HirePrep. And if we had investors at that point, that would have been a really difficult conversation to say, hey, we're not reaching our targets on time. We need some more time for development. But since it's just me, it's very easy. I can just be sitting at my desk and all right, we need to push our launch back a month and a half. Done. I don't need to talk to anybody about it. So it's definitely nice having that freedom and having that agility. Because at the end of the day, I think that building a solid business is a lot more than just growth at all expenses, just to make your investors happy.
Well, speaking of growth, you mentioned kind of in the intro, you run a few newsletters and you've had massive success. You hit 16,000 subscribers earlier today. So fantastic. How have you gone through that process? I mean, as someone who just started a newsletter myself. I would love to get to that stage at some point. But yeah, it's not just one, but it's not just two. It seems like there's a lot going on there. So how have you kind of managed that process?
Yeah, so there are 2 newsletters right now. The second one, we're actually launching our first edition next week.
Okay.
So I actually just got the first draft in from one of our researchers who are going about and writing it. That's for the Deal Talk newsletter that I mentioned earlier. But as for the Daily Technical, we're on edition 96, released today. So it definitely wasn't quick. Like, we released one edition Monday through Friday, like one edition each day Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of volume in a short period of time, which I think has attributed to how we were able to grow it so quickly. But in the early stages, it's really just not getting discouraged when you're sending your newsletter and like 10 people are reading it, and 4 of them are your Google accounts that you subscribe to it.
Yeah, I'm the king of having like 5 different Gmail accounts for my YouTube videos, so I get it.
And then the other few are like your mom and your girlfriend, and then a couple of your friends.
Hopefully, yeah.
And it's really difficult to go and like keep writing it every day.
Yeah.
But it was just a matter of staying consistent. Like, it took us 20 editions, so 4 weeks to break 100 subscribers.
Okay.
So during that time, I mean, I was writing just for myself, just to stay consistent and continue and just getting it done.
Yeah.
So I think early growth, a lot of what worked for us was cold outreach on LinkedIn. So we were able to fuel a lot with our cold outreach. Like, I had a LinkedIn post about this the other day. But cold outreach on LinkedIn is a great way to go and validate a startup idea. Like, a lot of people think like you need to go and spend all this money on a landing page, go and run ads, do a bunch of like really in-depth market research. But if you can go and pinpoint exactly who you're building for and go and reach out to them on LinkedIn, and you can automate this once you figure out who you're reaching out to. There are some tools like Phantom Buster, Snov, even just like Airtable and Make.com automations that you can go and use, and all you're doing is managing your inbox at this point. It really doesn't take much time once you learn that.
Yeah.
But just reaching out and saying, hey, here's what I'm building. Would you be interested in getting on my wait list? And whenever someone would opt into the wait list, instead, I wouldn't send them to a form to fill out. I would just have them send me their email in the LinkedIn chat, because it's just a lot more personal like that. Like, you don't want to be reaching out to someone and say, hey, I'm working on this really early stage startup. I think that you would be a great user, but go fill out this form. It makes it feel like very impersonal. Yeah. So collecting their email directly within the message, and then with that email, going and adding them to the wait list, and then also adding them to the newsletter.
Okay.
So we got our first 1,000 subscribers just solely through cold outreach. And then after the first 1,000, that's when you're able to like launch a referral program and start getting like 10, 20 referrals each time that you send it out. I mean, you need a lead magnet for that. I mean, lead magnet, that's a completely different discussion. But yeah, so referral network, I think that was a big growth lever for us. And then also just cross promotion with other people in the space. Like, once you hit that 1,000 subscriber threshold, it makes it a little bit easier to go and reach out to someone and say, hey, I'll promote your newsletter if you promote mine. And like, sometimes that ends up being, if it's someone who has a much bigger newsletter, and I would just pay them $2 per subscriber on top of like the number of subscribers that I got them. So the subscribers they got me, my subscribers they got them times 2. That's how much I would pay for that promotion. So cross promotions were really effective in the early stages, and then also just social media content. I noticed that I've gotten a lot of value from posting on LinkedIn. None of my posts go super viral. I'll get like 10, 20 likes on each one. But we got our first coaching client that came inbound from LinkedIn posts. I ended up getting connected with one of my partners that I'm working on with HirePrep, Varun Sharat, who was on your show a couple months ago. So I mean, I think just building content and just really putting yourself out there as much as possible is the best way to grow something like this. And the way the Daily Technical works, there's a lot of like instant gratification built in there. When someone submits their answer, they get AI feedback in their inbox within 60 seconds. A lot of people would share that with their friends. I know this because we track attribution on Beehive, so we can see exactly where someone came from, and a lot of people came just from referral links with their friends.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds like another way that you've gamified some aspects of your life. Just, you were talking about the time blocking and all of that earlier. So yeah, clearly you've done a fantastic job of that. You've thought through. You've definitely watched some good YouTube videos on that.
Oh yeah.
But something also that you touched on is just the importance of putting yourself out there. And I know so many creators or want to be creators. I don't want to say want to be, because that seems mean, but aspiring creators, and they're so stuck on having just a perfect first draft, the perfect first newsletter. This was something that I struggled with. I mean, I just launched last week, and it took me like 5 days to actually finally finish my draft. And like, I'm not that type of person necessarily. And clearly you've done a good job of just understanding that things take time. The first few issues maybe won't be the best you've ever written, and that's the point. The same goes for LinkedIn. how did you get comfortable with that, and what would your advice be to someone if they're kind of in a similar stage but they haven't seen kind of the compounding part take part yet?
Yeah, so I mean, I was really against going and building a presence on LinkedIn at first, not from the sense of like personally I didn't want to do it. I really did want to do it, and I saw the value of it. I just, for lack of a better term, I thought it was really cringy to go and build up a LinkedIn presence.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the notion that anybody who's not doing it, like that's kind of the notion that they have about going through it and trying to build an audience like that.
Yeah.
But I just stopped caring what anyone thought about it. And I was like, you know what, whatever, I'm just going to post this. People who like it, people who don't, they're not going to engage with it, so it's not going to show up on their timeline in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So I just kind of detached myself from caring about what this looked like externally. And then I also detached myself from the outcome. I batch all of my posts, so I write everything on Sunday. And I just put it into like a 4-hour block on Sunday afternoon, and I write all of my newsletters, all of my LinkedIn posts, and just get it done. Because I think the most difficult thing is just consistency. If you're trying to post every day, but you're trying to draft a post every day, it's going to take you probably twice as long to write all of those posts if you split it up, because you have to kind of like get in the zone to write, open up the platforms you're using, do some research, figure out what you're writing about. But if you do it all at once, it takes like half the time. Yeah. So I think that's half the battle, is batching all of your posts and getting them all written ahead of time. And then I think the other half is, like I said before, detaching yourself from the outcome and just writing to write. Because even if you're not getting a ton of likes and a ton of validation on socials, people are still going to see it. And it's incredibly valuable for even like, say a couple years down the line, I'm going and reaching out to people on LinkedIn for some other offer, some other business that I'm working on, and they just want to scroll through my LinkedIn content. They'll have basically an unlimited supply of content if I'm posting Monday through Friday for the next 3 years. And that's like, that tells them a lot. It's more powerful than any resume. They can go and see basically your journey over the last few years, what you thought about, what you were interested in, the way that you write. And I think that the way someone writes is very much linked to the way that someone thinks. Like if you're a good writer, then most often you're going to be a good thinker. So being able to put that content out there, I think is huge. But the next hurdle I'm trying to get over is short form content and going and actually putting myself on video. That's another step to overcome. But I think getting the written content out there and just really getting consistent and kind of like working that consistency muscle with writing is a great first step. And if anyone like myself doesn't want to go and put themselves out there in short form video, which I think I'm going to clip this podcast up and get some short form videos made, like just starting off with writing, I think is really the best way to go.
I love what you said about just kind of ignoring the naysayers, ignoring all of that. I mean, and just how thinking LinkedIn was cringy. And I mean, it is, but that's kind of the point. And I was at a creator economy event a few months ago, and like even just in the last few months, we've seen just a shift with LinkedIn, where now everyone's like, oh, like I need to get on LinkedIn and start doing that. Especially if you're in like a niche where it's a lot of professionals, and whether B2B or whatever it may be, a lot of opinions have changed there. But what they were saying is, at this panel that I was at, is like everything started off as cringy. I mean, look at all the people now who are trying to post on TikTok. I mean, we're looking out at Murray Hill, we'll probably see 3 people walk past like trying to film the next viral TikTok. 5 years ago, no one was doing that. You were made fun of, all of that. No one had a YouTube channel. No one wanted to have a YouTube channel. Now, a lot of people from college that I know are trying to build their platforms. Whereas, like, I know when I was starting, like, it was weird. And so I think embracing that is so important. And so just having kind of the muscle mass to be able to go through that, and ignore that and kind of have tunnel vision is a skill that takes you far.
100%.
Yeah. So related to that too, I mean, just you mentioned writing, and that's kind of the first step. How did you learn to kind of write the way that you write? How do you put it in front of other people first and have them kind of review it, or how do you what's your thought process for from first word to hitting publish? Yeah,
so I always thought I was a horrible writer growing up. I grew up in like kind of like a small town in central Massachusetts. For high school, I went to like kind of our saying on the football team was put the hay in the barn. It was like very much like a farm town public school. Okay. And I ended up getting recruited to go to a prep school in Boston for the last 3 years of high school. So I ended up repeating my sophomore year, going there for 3 years. And at this point, I'm like, okay, I can't be a bad writer anymore. Everyone here is really smart. Okay. I need to figure this out. So I met with my English teacher one-on-one for probably like 6 months straight, and just really honed in my writing skills from like a academic writing perspective. Yeah. And I think that a lot of the fundamentals that I learned there have kind of carried into writing for LinkedIn. But I think kind of branching off into more of the specific, like writing for an audience, social media type writing, it's really just repetition. Like there are some really good YouTube videos that you can watch that will give you a good foundation, but you can only watch so many videos, and they're only going to help so much if you're not actually going and practicing and writing.
Yeah.
So I think what really did it for me was some of this, like obviously working with token tag and like running socials, writing blog posts, writing emails, just like practicing in that way helped a lot. But what I really noticed was when I was working with Centrifuge, doing growth marketing, they had a really talented marketing team. My direct report there, her name is Baji. She's the CMO there. She's awesome, really great writer. I really admire the way that she runs everything there and the way that she just operates the marketing machine that they have. And I learned so much about writing for socials, writing for an audience, just through working with them, working with her. They have a really talented PR team. So I think it's putting yourself in the same room as people who are really good at writing and getting it proofread by them and getting their feedback and just kind of going through that calibration. Yeah. Like I learned lessons there that I've taken to this day and I'll probably take to the grave at some point. Yeah. But as for my writing process itself, I leverage AI quite a bit in my writing.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was leading into is, you talk about kind of the manual aspect of it, of writing and coming up with ideas, but I know we'll talk a little bit more about just automating processes. So I was just curious the juxtaposition there and how you've gone about that.
Yeah, so AI is really good for idea generation. So what I'll do, I have a really long prompt I can't talk through right now. It'll take like a couple minutes. Yeah. But it basically just goes through like the 4 different content pillars that I write about. So like one is recruiting, one is interview prep, one is going 0 to 1, and then one is AI and automation. So it goes through all those content pillars, and then it has 7 different types of content, so like educational, informative, telling a story, like that type of stuff. And it will go through and create a table with ideas for all of those different topics. And you can set the prompt up to go and ask you clarifying questions about what you're interested in, what you're working on, what's relevant, and it will go and cater those ideas to what's relevant for you right now. So I go through that to really get the first like idea for a piece of content done. And it'll end up like outputting like a pretty good hook, and the output will just be a hook for each idea. Okay. And then from that hook, I'll go and then prompt AI again, and I'll say like, it's pretty long, but it starts with something like, you're a professional like ghostwriter for helping founders build their LinkedIn presence. You're working with Mike Lukasevicz, founder of HirePrep and Axia, blah, blah, blah. He wants to write a post about insert post idea. Interview him so that you have full context to go and write this post. So then it will go and ask me 5 to 10 questions about the post. I go through, type all of my answers in, and then based on some of the formatting that I have in the prompt about how I'd like the post formatted, about how I'd like the hook written, it will go through and create a first draft for me. And this first draft, like, if I posted all these first drafts, like, I'd probably get banned from LinkedIn for AI content. But it gives a really good structure to go and start with. Yeah. So I'll take this first draft and then I'll put it in Hemingway, which is just a writing tool. You can see the grade level that you're writing at. And for LinkedIn, I like to kind of target, I guess for finance, probably like an 8th to 10th grade reading level. Okay. Just makes it like pretty understandable for people. And if someone's scrolling on LinkedIn, they might be like sitting on a bus or like going like walking, and you don't want them to have to like reread each sentence.
Now I'm curious. Like, I need to throw some things in there, and it might be a little bit embarrassing. So that's cool.
Yeah, really helpful tool. And I'll just read through each line, and I think through how I would say this in a conversation, and then I just edit it accordingly, and then just go and get the post out there. Yep. So it's very much, it's not like taking the lazy way out of having AI draft the post. It probably takes honestly just as long as writing the post myself, but I think that the output ends up being better.
Yeah, and I'm sure you found ways to apply that to other aspects of your life. But of course, you keep on mentioning AI, but what platform is it that you use? Which LLM?
So I've actually been experimenting between ChatGPT and Claude, and I've noticed that Claude is a lot better for these writing tasks, whereas ChatGPT is a lot better for anything like data analytics. Or I use AI a lot too to like, if like, I guess an example is like I'm going and like reaching out and having a conversation with a potential client about a project that I'd be working with them on. To go through the first draft of the proposal, I'll give AI the transcript of that call, because I have Fireflies, which is just an AI note taker sitting in every call that I'm on, and I'll give that transcript I use ChatGPT for this because it's a lot better at going and parsing through a transcript like that to go and create the first draft of the proposal. So they're kind of both very complementary. I have ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini, which I've been experimenting with a little bit. Google's been improving Gemini slowly, but I think that they're getting there. Gemini's image generation is top tier, though. I think they have the best image generation out of everyone. But it's really a kind of personal preference. I've heard often that Claude is better for writing. But a lot of times, if I have a prompt, I'll go and copy and paste it into all three and then see which answer I like more.
Okay, I like that. And honestly, yeah, for whatever reason, I've been on a Perplexity wave recently. I just like the way that it condenses information and gives me all the sources in a good manner. So, but yeah, I think it's just fascinating how much the world has changed in 5 years, just in terms of the tools that are at our disposal. You talk a lot on your LinkedIn posts, but also just, today, of going from 0 to 1, an idea to a product. I know that's a huge topic, but what is your advice to somebody who maybe has an idea, they're trying to kind of play with it, but they don't know if it's what they want to do, what they want to commit their life to in this moment? Like, how can someone go from 0 to 1 for whatever it is that they're passionate about?
I mean, I think the first part is really just testing the idea and seeing if there's interest in it. So like I mentioned earlier with LinkedIn outreach, that's a great way to go and validate an idea. Really low cost, really low time commitment. Like maybe create like a quick little mock-up of your product in Figma. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just like show people what's going on. So that's the first way to go and really validate the idea. And then once you've seen validation that people would be interested in the idea, I mean, during the validation process, like try to get on calls with these people, create a list of questions to go and ask them, like really uncover their pain points, figure out what you can do to provide the most benefit to them and build something that they would pay for. Because at the end of the day, like it's cool to build a business for something that you care about, but like, you're building a business to generate revenue and make money. So you want to make sure it's something that people are going to pay for. So I think that's really important in this first part of the process. And then from there, you have an idea, it's validated, people are interested, people are going to pay for it. That's when you start going into the product development side of things. Or if it's a service, I mean, I would argue that if it's a service, you don't even have to do the initial discovery phase. Just try to sell it and then fulfill it to the first person that buys. But if you're going and building a product, then you have to figure out how you're going to build it. And that is becoming a bit easier with AI. Like I've met a few people who have like traditionally finance backgrounds and they've learned how to code through like a couple months just using AI to go and write code and build like a full scale web application. So there's that route if you want to go and take the time to go and learn how to actually write code and build a product yourself. There are a lot of great no code tools out there. So there's still a bit of a learning curve there. No code doesn't mean easy. It just means easier. So going the no-code route or going and hiring a development team. So what I did with HirePrep is hire a development team to build HirePrep using a no-code tool. Because hiring a development team that's going to be building a product on a custom code base is much more expensive than if we're going to be building it on a no-code tool. And with the no-code tool, it also makes it easier for me if I want to go and change what the heading says on this page. It's a lot easier for me to go and visually do it in this no-code tool than it would be if I was just going through HTML code and trying to change that word. So, the next step would be going and figuring out how you're going to build the product, and then actually going and reaching out to a team and building the product. And my advice would be, if you're using an external development team, heavily outline the product beforehand, because they're not going to be thinking about it the same way as you are. And a lot of times, depending on who you have working with you have to align their incentives right? So we started off working with a development agency to build HirePrep, and the incentives were very misaligned. An agency is trying to push through as many clients as possible so that they can increase their margins, because the longer they spend with you, the lower their margin is on that product. And I kind of realized that we had a few lingering bugs at the end of development of our beta that just weren't getting fixed. We were kind of like the bottom of their priority list. So I ended up finding a freelancer on Upwork. The way that I kind of like go and look on Upwork is I'll find someone who has really good reviews, and then I'll try to find them on LinkedIn and see what their profile looks like. And this guy was posting like great content about the OpenAI API and Bubble, which is exactly what we were using. So I reached out to him like, hey, here's where we're at. We've built the product. There are a few little bugs. I'd love you to come and do an audit and then fix everything. So he came through, did a full audit, picked out more bugs than I even knew existed in the product, and fixed it all within a week. So I was like, okay, I want this guy on board, and put him in a position to go and build out a team under him and really start scaling the product. So that's how we've been building since I ended up firing that initial development agency. So if you can find a way to do it in-house and incentivize people correctly, like especially going into like emerging markets and using the global workforce and paying just $5 an hour more than the standard is there, you're going to get really good work and build up a ton of trust. So that's what we did for the development side of things. But a good product is essentially useless if you don't have distribution. And a lot of second-time founders will say, like, focus on distribution more than you focus on product. So that's where that's where the value is of having a development team that's going and handling product. You're just creating outlines for the wireframes, data structures, then they're going and building it. Then your time can be used for marketing, building up your brand, conducting outreach campaigns, creating content. I think it's validation, product, and then marketing. And then from there, you're at, I'd say, 0.5. And then just keep doing all of those things. And if the idea is good and you execute well, you'll go from 0 to 1.
All right, Mike. Well, you just gave us a fantastic breakdown of how to go 0 to 1. Included in that is a lot of technical terms, and you're obviously still in the day-to-day operations of a lot of things that the traditional econ and psychology major might not get. So curious kind of how much of your learning has been, of course, on your own. What platforms do you use? Because you don't always see that when it's a non-technical founder, but to still have such a deep understanding. So just curious how you've gone through that process, how you've overcome being a non-technical founder, if that's how you would describe yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider myself like a quasi-technical founder. I think I'm kind of like a no-code founder.
Sure.
I'd say. But it's like a lot of just like messing around and figuring stuff out. Like my first startup experience, we were working with a development agency to build a product, and as I just alluded to, that's a horrible idea because incentives are misaligned. But you learn a lot working with people like that and being able to get on those calls and just writing down any terms that you hear them say that you don't really know, and then just going, like, I would just go and like look all of them up after the call and like write down definitions in my notebook and just kind of start slowly internalizing them. After you hear the same term over and over again, you start to kind of understand it. And like really big picture to me was understanding the development process and understanding like this doesn't take any technical knowledge really, but just understanding how to think through a process and how to think through like, okay, this happens, now this needs to happen, but if this happened and this criteria was here, then Y should happen instead of X. Like just thinking through everything like that. And it just takes time at that point to really just go and think through something formulaically. But there are a lot of like really good resources online. Like right now, I think the way the internet is, it's never made it easier to learn something, but it's also never made it harder because there are so many distractions. Like you could go onto YouTube and watch a great tutorial for how to create an email automation using Make.com and Airtable, or you could go doom scroll on TikTok for 5 hours. So it's definitely like trying to balance that. But there are a lot of really good resources, and also just what I noticed is I tried to I'll use Make.com and Airtable as an example. So Airtable is a database. Make.com is how you can go and connect that database to other tools and just like automate different things happening. And I tried going and learning how to use these platforms. And like Airtable has like an Airtable course. Make.com is the Make Academy. I tried going through both of them, and I just got really bored going through those videos all the time. And you don't really learn anything by watching videos. So I just started slowly messing around with building things that I thought would be helpful. And over probably the course of like 6 or 7 months, I became, I think, pretty proficient at using both platforms. And it's really just a matter of starting. Like when I started using Airtable and Make.com, I had no idea what a webhook was. I didn't really know much about APIs. But through going through and actually building things, and whenever I would come to a roadblock, there are a bunch of chat GPTs made for these platforms. So you just go into the GPT store and you search like Make.com, and you can just ask it your question of what you're trying to do, and it will give you a step-by-step guide for how to like create the system that you're looking to build. So doing that, as well as joining a few school communities. I've found school communities really helpful for learning this type of stuff. Because a lot of them, like, they'd be like, you pay like $100 a month and you can get access to a bunch of different courses, a bunch of different templates. And the most valuable aspect that I had found from these school communities is you'll get access to an hour-long Zoom call every week where you can go and talk with the founder of the community and just get advice for what you're working on, get your questions answered, or just hear what people are struggling with and hear the answers. So I joined one of those communities, and I was pretty active in it for 2 or 3 months, and that's where a lot of my learning came, from just being able to dynamically talk with people through the process and get advice where I was facing roadblocks. But I think it's really a matter of just getting started and doing it. That's the best way to go and learn anything. And it sucks at the beginning because you're not good and you struggle, and doing like something that feels really basic takes a long time. But after a couple of months in that learning curve, you're up the learning curve a little bit. You're going to be really thankful that you took that chance and just started.
It's interesting because the thing you said about writing down terms that you didn't understand and looking them up later, that was the same advice that I got from my first manager at KPMG when I started my career. And I think, just having that curiosity and being able to admit that you don't know everything. I think that's what sets apart sets people apart from the people who just kind of are like, I'll learn it eventually, to, no, I'm really curious what that means. Like, let me dive deeper. So I think that's a really smart approach. All right, so coming up on the end here, the majority of your time now, or a big focus is HirePrep. You talked through kind of the development of that, the big investment there. So just curious, tell us a little bit more about it. How is it a resource? How can it be a resource to viewers? And also, like, what motivated it?
100%. So, I mean, the motivation for it was just really noticing the gap in the resources that were available and what tech would allow. But as for what the platform is itself, there are really two ways that you can use HirePrep. So one is a practice session, and then one is a mock interview. So the way a practice session works is you can go through, and all of our questions in our question database are broken up between 7 categories and 31 different topics. So you can go and either select the role that you want to interview for, and it will pre-select categories and topics for you, or you can go and form a custom interview. So you can practice for, I think, about 8 or 9 roles on the HirePrep platform right now within High Finance, just piecing together the questions that we have on the database. Yeah. So you can either select the role or go and custom make an interview, and then, or a practice session. And then when you go into the practice session itself, you see a question show up on your screen, and you can either type or speak your answer. We wanted to give the option for both because I feel like a lot of students will be studying, they'll be sitting in the back of a lecture, and no one's going to be able to go and sit and talk to their computer in the back of a lecture to answer these questions. So yeah, either type or record your answer. Obviously recording your answer simulates a higher view more so, kind of like a virtual interview, and you can just get the repetition of seeing yourself in the camera, speaking your answer out loud, which is incredibly valuable. Yeah. And then from there, you submit your answer, it goes through our feedback mechanism, and you get a score out of 10 on your answer to each question. And then you get AI-generated feedback on your answer. And then from here, you rate our feedback out of 5 stars so that we know if it was good or if it was bad. If it was 4 stars or higher, then that goes to our training data, refines our AI model. And if it was a 3 or less, then someone in our team goes and internally reviews it, fixes it, making it a 4 or 5, and then that goes into our training data as well. So our feedback gets better over time. Yeah. And then as for the mock interview side of things, it's the same setup where you select the role that you want to interview for. Then you can select an industry that role would be in. So like investment banking, you could select like TMT, industrials, like healthcare, really anything. And then you go into the mock interview, and the mock interview is 10 questions, and each interview is randomly generated. So the way that we sourced our questions on HirePrep is we scraped the web to find all of the questions that were available for high finance recruiting. Yeah. And based on the results from scraping, we assigned a frequency score to each question. So this is like category specific frequency scores. So within each category, each question is ranked based on how frequently it appeared online. Yeah. So when these interviews are generated for each category, it pulls questions based on the frequency score so that you're getting questions that are more likely to be asked in an interview. Yeah. Granted, we don't have proprietary interview data from these firms. It's really hard to get. Yeah. But we used how often a question appeared online as a proxy for how often it would get asked in a real interview. Yeah. And I feel like from going through these mock interviews, I think it's been pretty accurate. Yeah. So I mean, on the HirePrep platform, there are trillions of different combinations of mock interviews that could be possible. So you'll start with telling me about yourself for every mock interview. That's the only thing that's consistent. And then you'll go through 3 or 4 behavioral questions, and then 5 or 6 technical questions. And then the interview wraps up. While you're going and answering those questions, you get the score, you get the feedback on each question. And then at the end of an interview, you get an overall interview score out of 100. And then you get like one really targeted piece of feedback about what you need to work on from the interview itself. Yeah. And then you can go and track all of that in the dashboard. You can track your progress over time on like a weekly, monthly, or quarterly view. You can see total questions answered, time practiced. And we also have a leaderboard section. So this is where it gets fun. Yeah. People can go and compete, and we have an all-time leaderboard, a 30-day leaderboard, and a 7-day leaderboard. And the way points work is points are based on how much you practice, not how good you are. Because if we based it on score, that kind of misaligns incentives. People are going to be going through, like if we have like a really good reward. So I guess the first month that we launch, we're having a competition with all of the clubs on HirePrep. So the way that a club partnership works is a club partners with us. They agree to promote HirePrep as a resource to use within their club, and in exchange, we give everybody associated with that organization 50% off for life on the platform. So the first month that we launch, we're hosting a club competition where whichever club gets the highest score per user with a minimum of 5 users, we're donating $1,000 to their club curriculum to go and just further their education. So that's an example of how incentives could be misaligned, because then they could just have everybody in the club just going through and like reading through like the 500 question guide and just like command effing it to get the correct answer for the question and just boost their score. So that's why we did it as on a usage basis. Yeah. So yeah, we have the leaderboard, And that's the platform. It's really simple right now. I think it's really easy to use, which is great. And it's very complementary to other resources that are out there for practice. Like, I don't think it replaces coaching, obviously, because we offer coaching.
Sure.
I don't think it replaces going through some of these courses and guides. I mean, we're creating our own courses and guides to go along with our question bank. I think it's very complementary. It's a way to kind of experience mock interviews on demand. That's kind of the tagline that we shifted to once we built out the mock interview feature, because it's really hard to go and get a mock interview. You're either paying a coach a couple $100s an hour to go mock interview you, or you're bothering an upperclassman or a friend or someone you've been networking with, and like those are all great ways to go and get mock interview experience, but you can't go and do a mock interview every day like that.
Sure.
So that's kind of where we fit in with this platform. But I still think that like the process someone should go through for learning technicals is going and diving into one of these guides, some of these written resources, getting exposure to everything the first time, then go practice on HirePrep and get ready to crush your interview.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fantastic platform that you've built, and I think just for myself, when I was going through that process, it would have been extremely helpful, because not everyone also has an older mentor that they can reach out to, or someone in their fraternity who was able to get an internship in that space. So I think it's great, as it also kind of democratizes access to those resources that some people may not get at their schools.
Exactly, and we're trying to make interview prep fun. So when you're going and waiting for your feedback, we have a loading animation that shows up, and it kind of like feels like a slot machine when you pull it and you're waiting to get your feedback. And you're like, all right, what's my score going to be? What's my feedback going to be on here?
Yeah.
So really just trying to make interview practice enjoyable, because like, let's face it, interview practice can be really boring. You just lock yourself in a room reading through all these question guides, trying to memorize everything. It's horrible. But I've noticed, like, even just from our beta, there have been users who've been practicing from anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, which has been great to see. Just showing that even it's really early stages of the beta, we only had the core practice session functionality, that it's proving to be pretty sticky. And we're also helping you stay on top of your studying. So we have a streak feature. So if you practice every day, you're going to build up your streak, and we'll send you reminder emails if you don't. Just to really keep you accountable to your process and going and preparing for interviews.
No, I think that's genius. And also, I mean, it's still early, but when people end up getting the internships and they get the full-time jobs, they're gonna feel a lot of loyalty to you. And for a lot of them, and when someone else down the road reaches out and says, hey, like, how'd you go through this process? Or can you give me a mock interview? Where they're going to be signing up. So I think that's genius. And of course, you're only as good as the resource and the database of questions. And so I've talked to a lot of people, but to scrape it all, but then also still to filter it by what shows up more common, I think that is a really smart thing.
Yeah, no, I'm really happy with the way that we were able to go and do that, because at first, that was really the big issue, was how are we going to fill this database with questions? Because you can't just go and prompt ChatGPT and say, hey, make 50 accounting questions for high finance interviews. Like, those questions aren't going to be great. So we just ran like a bunch of different Google searches, like tapped into a bunch of different databases online, and we were able to, I think we processed anywhere from like 50 to 100,000 different results in individual questions, and then ended up condensing that down into our database of 1,100 questions, which I think works out really well because of just the sheer customizability of it. You can practice for almost any role that you're going to go and be interviewing for within high finance. And I think the most difficult part was definitely the behavioral questions, because it's not so much like technical questions are pretty easy to go and like create a scoring rubric on, provide feedback, because it's either you got it right or you didn't. Whereas behavioral, we're focusing more on using the correct framework to tell a story than we are about the content itself. Obviously, if it's not a relevant story, our AI will say like, hey, maybe don't talk about planning your fraternity mixer in an interview.
Darn.
But yeah, that was the difficult part was the behavioral questions, but I think that we've nailed it down and gotten pretty good scaffolding around how we go and provide feedback there.
Yeah, and I think that's smart too, because when I was going through the process, I was thinking, behaviorals are the easy part. I've had experiences, I'll be able to talk about that. But it's a lot harder to practice, and so by going through that process on HirePrep, I think it is a really great tool for students.
The behaviorals are really what matter. I mean, it's kind of a given. You have to get the technicals right. But at the end of the day, like if they're deciding between two candidates and someone had better answers to the more of like the elevator test behavioral questions, I'm pretty sure 9 out of 10 times the recruiter is going to go with the person they liked more from their behavioral answers. Yeah, no,
I totally agree, and that's what I tell students all the time. And especially, we've spoken at length about AI today and just how that's going to transform things. Finance is definitely coming for And so the one thing that AI can't really take away is your ability to connect with someone personally and to tell a story and to have them relate to you. And so being able to do that in the interview process is incredibly important, but too often you don't see the hire or the prep programs really emphasize that. It's all about the technical skills. So I think it's great that you've been able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
On a related note too, you've of course at this point gone through thousands upon thousands of technical interviews. Do you feel confident that if you were to walk into a technical interview tomorrow, you'd be able to crush it?
I would hope so. Honestly, maybe not. I haven't been practicing as much. When my use of the platform is largely giving demos to people, and when I'm giving a demo, I'm not giving a real answer. I'm not using it. If you look at my score over time, when I started using it within the first week, I was using it and really testing it and giving my real answers. But now my average score is like a 2 because I'll be giving a demo and I'll just turn on the voice recording and it will transcribe everything I'm saying as I'm talking about the process of recording and transcribing answers, and I'll get like a 1 or a 2 on all the questions. But I think I would do pretty well.
Yeah. And so obviously through HirePrep and through your newsletter, through everything that you're doing, you're constantly interacting with students and young professionals trying to break into finance. Going through this process of building all these tools, what have you learned about the process? What have you learned about people applying for these roles that maybe you didn't think of beforehand?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned is that there's not one way to do it. There are many different ways to go about securing an internship offer. Or even a full-time offer. There are many different ways to go and get someone to get on an interview or an informational interview with you. Even just like small things. Like there's a huge debate about whether or not to attach your resume to a networking email you're sending out.
Sure.
At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
And I've kind of noticed that with a lot of things in the process. The big thing that matters is you're able to go and connect with another person and you know your stuff technically.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, no matter how you get there, no matter what coaching program you use, what guide you read, whether you use HirePrep or not, I mean, you're probably going to be better at technicals if you do. But then again, people have been getting internship offers before HirePrep was a thing.
Yeah.
But it's really that there isn't just one correct way to do it. When I was going through the process, I was really trying to find like the one like silver bullet that would go and get me that job.
Yeah.
But it's really not as simple as that. I mean, there's a lot more to it. It depends where you go to school, how you conduct yourself on calls, who you know, some cases what your last name is, even though maybe not shouldn't be that way. But yeah, there are just multiple ways to go about it and see success in the process.
So yeah, speaking of success, I mean, you've had a successful year, you've had a successful career already, albeit the beginning of it. I would love to just hear what your goal is for 2025 across everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall there's consistency, keeping the momentum going, and also detaching from the outcome. So I kind of see like any output that you would have. So whether that be likes and followers on LinkedIn, whether that be revenue generated by your business, I see that as a lagging indicator about what you were doing 3 months ago. So definitely just keeping the consistency going and kind of detaching from those outcomes. Obviously, like, yes, want to make more money in 2025, want to get more followers in 2025, want HirePrep to be profitable in 2025.
Yeah.
But it's really just about continuing with the consistent efforts and pivoting if you need to.
Yeah.
Like I'd say with HirePrep, I think a goal that we've had since I really set out and outlined our first financial model back in September or August was to hit 100 paying users in our first month of launching.
Yeah.
And our first goal was also to have 1,500 newsletter subscribers at the time we launched, and we've about over 10x that at this point. Yeah. So I'm feeling really optimistic that we're going to be able to go and crush that goal. And on the Axia side of things, I really hope to build up some systems and processes and start hiring and really scaling in that sense. The reason that we pivoted from growth marketing to more of this like lead generation and deal sourcing is because growth marketing is more of an art than a science. It's very hard to scale myself out of, because when I take on a client, they're hiring me to go and write and build these systems, and there's a degree of having to really like buy into the brand and learn a lot about the company that's really difficult to outsource and really difficult to find good talent to go and help fulfill. Whereas like this lead generation and deal sourcing is a lot more formulaic. If I can go and build a really good process and outline everything really well, then I could automate most of it or bring in a few employees or analysts to come and really help us scale that thing up. Yeah. So yeah, I think the two goals are 100 users within HirePrep's first month of launch, like 100 subscribed users, and then just to build systems with Axia. Yeah,
well, fantastic. For those of you who are listening and want to get in on the action yourselves and might get to those 100 users, where can they find everything they need to know about HirePrep? Where can they connect with you? Just so they can keep on keeping on.
Mike Lukasevicz on LinkedIn. You can go down a rabbit hole and find everything with HirePrep, everything with Axia on there. Also HirePrep on LinkedIn. Our domain is hireprep.ai. The Daily Technical, dailytechnical.com. The Deal Talk is thedealtalk.com. Everything's very easy to find. HirePrep ranks first on Google if you search HirePrep. So yeah, just find us there. You can really go down a rabbit hole on LinkedIn. So I think my LinkedIn's first place to start, and you can get everything from there.
Perfect. Well, Mike, it was an absolute pleasure. I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone watching did too. So really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was great to be here. Great to come in person and record this. And
yeah.
Wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. Look forward to the next time.